They were hysterical. They claimed my younger sister Chloe had been rushed to the hospital after a horrific car accident. I spent the entire night crying in my empty apartment, surrounded by a birthday cake I'd never eat. But 3 days later, I found out the truth. Chloe hadn't been in an accident. She was perfectly fine, lounging poolside at a luxury resort, drinking cocktails my parents had paid for. It was all a calculated lie to steal my spotlight, and it worked. That night, something inside me snapped. I changed my number, packed my bags, and vanished from their lives completely. Now, exactly 9 years later, they've finally tracked me down. But they aren't looking for forgiveness. They're looking for a miracle. And they have absolutely no idea that I am the only one who can ruin them. My name is Erica, and I am 34 years old. But if you want to understand how I got here, we have to go back exactly 9 years, to the night my life fractured into pieces. It was the eve of my 25th birthday, a milestone I had spent months planning. I had saved up my own hard-earned money to host a beautiful dinner for my friends and family at a lovely downtown restaurant. For once, I thought I would have a moment that was entirely my own. But deep down, a familiar, sickening dread was clawing at my stomach. Days before my birthday, I knew my sister would make something up to make my parents cancel the event. It was a cold, unshakable certainty. Chloe was 3 years younger, a master manipulator who couldn't stand a single second where the spotlight wasn't shining directly on her. If I got a promotion, she suddenly had a medical mystery. If I bought a car, she had an emotional crisis. Sure enough, 2 hours before my guests were set to arrive, my phone vibrated violently on the counter. It was my mother, her voice a theatrical symphony of breathless sobs and panicked screams. She told me that Chloe had been in a horrific, catastrophic car accident on the highway and was currently being rushed into emergency surgery. My father took the phone, his tone gruff and demanding, telling me that the family dinner was obviously off and that I was selfish if I even thought about celebrating. They hung up, leaving me standing alone in my apartment. I spent the next 10 hours crying until my eyes bled, staring at a beautiful, untouched birthday cake I would never eat, paralyzed by guilt and terror for my little sister. But the truth always finds a way out. 3 days later, a mutual friend who didn't know about the accident posted a live video on social media. There was Chloe. She wasn't in a hospital bed. She didn't have a single scratch on her. She was lounging poolside at a 5-star luxury resort in Miami, laughing and clinking cocktail glasses with my parents, who had completely funded the trip. The entire accident was a meticulously crafted lie, designed solely to destroy my milestone day and keep me firmly beneath Chloe's shadow. As I stared at the screen, the overwhelming sadness inside me instantly hardened into pure ice. It had become a pattern I couldn't ignore anymore. I realized they would always choose her, and they would gladly ruin my life to keep her happy. So when they left for her again, I left for good. I changed my number, packed my entire life into 3 suitcases, and walked out into the dark, completely cutting the cord. Leaving everything behind wasn't just about changing my physical address. It was about completely erasing the girl who allowed herself to be a doormat. I moved 3 states away to a bustling metropolis where nobody knew my name or my family's history. Those first few years were an absolute gauntlet of survival. I slept on a mattress on the floor of a cramped studio apartment, eating ramen and working 80-hour weeks at a boutique consulting firm. Every single ounce of heartbreak, rejection, and lingering anger I carried from that ruined 25th birthday was funneled directly into my professional career. While Chloe was busy spending my parents' rapidly dwindling savings on temporary thrills, I was quietly building a reputation as an unstoppable force in the corporate world. I knew walking away was my only choice, but everyone in my town thought I was cruel for abandoning my family. Before I tell you how I built my success, tell this, and let me know which city or country you're watching from so I can see how far my story has traveled. By the time 9 years had passed, the exhausting grind had paid off in ways I never could have imagined. At 34, I had risen to become a senior managing partner at the firm, pulling in a high 6-figure salary and owning a gorgeous, sunlit brownstone in the city's most exclusive neighborhood. I was completely independent, financially invincible, and mentally at peace. Or so I thought, until the ghosts of my past finally caught up with me. The sanctuary I had meticulously built over 9 years was shattered on a rainy Tuesday evening. I was sitting in my living room, enjoying the quiet warmth of my fireplace and a glass of wine, when a heavy, rhythmic knocking echoed from the front door. My heart did a strange, erratic flutter. I wasn't expecting any deliveries, and very few people knew exactly where I lived. When I opened the door, the breath was instantly sucked right out of my lungs. Standing on my porch, drenched from the downpour, were my mother, my father, and Chloe. For a few agonizing seconds, nobody spoke. I stared at them, absorbing the shocking reality of their presence. They had aged terribly. My father's shoulders were hunched, his face lined with deep, permanent exhaustion. My mother looked frail, her eyes surrounded by dark shadows of stress. Even Chloe, who used to radiate an arrogant, untouchable energy, looked deflated, her designer clothes replaced by faded, ordinary garments. They looked like a family fleeing a disaster. Suddenly, my mother broke the silence, letting out a choked sob as she stepped forward, her arms reaching out to wrap around me in a tight, desperate embrace. "Erica, oh my beautiful girl, we finally found you," she cried, her voice dripping with that familiar, synthetic sympathy I had learned to despise. My father stepped into the foyer behind her, nodding with false warmth, attempting to smile as if 9 years of absolute, icy silence could be brushed away with a simple greeting. I stood entirely frozen, refusing to return the embrace, my eyes locked on Chloe, who merely offered a tight, nervous wave. The ghosts had arrived, and they brought a storm with them. I stepped back, forcing my mother's arms off me, and closed the front door, shutting out the howling wind. The warmth of my home felt like a stark contrast to the cold tension radiating from the three people standing in my foyer. "How did you find me, and exactly what you want?" I asked, my voice cutting through the quiet room like a scalpel. There was no room for pleasantries, no space for them to pretend they actually cared about my well-being after nearly a decade of abandonment. My father cleared his throat, looking down at his wet shoes, unable to meet my gaze. It was my mother who broke down first, burying her face in her hands as the ugly truth finally spilled out. They were completely ruined. Over the last 9 years, their enabling behavior had escalated to a catastrophic level. To fund Chloe's endless stream of failed business ventures, lavish vacations, and fabricated emergencies, they had systematically drained their entire retirement portfolio. When that ran out, they did the unthinkable. They took out a massive secondary mortgage on their primary family home, completely blinding themselves to the financial cliff they were walking over. Now, the bank was foreclosing, and they were weeks away from being completely homeless. That's when Chloe confidently stepped forward. There was no remorse in her eyes, no apology for the birthday lie that had fractured our family. Instead, she looked around my beautiful, expensive home with an expression of pure entitlement. "Look, Erica, you're obviously doing incredibly well for yourself," she said, her voice dripping with casual arrogance. "You have more money than you could ever need. We need you to cut a check to pay off our debts and buy back the house. It's the least you can do for your family." A cold, calculated calmness washed over me as Chloe's words echoed through the room. 9 years ago, her entitlement would have made me scream or cry, but tonight, it only fueled my focus. I looked at their desperate, expectant faces and realized that throwing a tantrum would achieve nothing. If I wanted true justice, I had to play their game, but play it significantly better. I took a slow breath, forcing a small, neutral nod, and looked directly at my parents. "I see," I said softly, letting a deliberate hint of hesitation soften my voice. "It sounds incredibly complicated. I can't just write a massive check blindly, but I am willing to look into this." The instant wave of relief that washed over the three of them was almost pathetic. My mother gasped, clutching her chest, while Chloe smirked, clearly believing she had successfully manipulated the big sister once again. I told them I needed a few days to thoroughly review all their financial documents, bank foreclosure notices, and outstanding legal debts to see how my firm's legal structures could handle it. They eagerly handed over a thick manila folder, thanked me profusely, and left my home with a false sense of absolute security, completely convinced that their financial savior had arrived. The moment the front door clicked shut behind them, my neutral expression vanished. I picked up my phone and immediately dialed two numbers. The first was a trusted corporate defense lawyer from my firm, and the second was a ruthless private investigator I had used for corporate asset tracking. I handed the files over to them that very night. It was time to dig into the dirty reality of Chloe's fraudulent businesses and my parents' exact debt profile. The trap was officially set. 3 days later, I invited my parents, Chloe, and their frantic family attorney to a formal, glass-walled conference room at my firm's headquarters. They arrived looking smug and relieved, walking in with the absolute certainty that they were about to sign papers that would completely wipe away their financial sins. Chloe was already scrolling through her phone, likely picking out her next luxury purchase on my dime. I sat at the head of the table, flanked by my corporate lawyer and my private investigator. I slid a thick stack of legal documents across the polished mahogany surface toward them. Before we discuss any money transferring, I began, my voice ringing with absolute, icy authority. We need to clarify exactly who you are dealing with. Their attorney picked up the top document, his eyes scanning the pages, and within 5 seconds, the color drained entirely from his face. He turned a sickly shade of gray, his hands shaking violently as he looked up at my parents. "What is this?" Sydney, their lawyer, stammered out. I smiled, leaning forward. "What you are looking at is the deed to your primary residence and the full profile of your secondary mortgage. My team didn't just review your debt. We quietly purchased it directly from the foreclosure bank. As of 9 o'clock this morning, I am your official landlord and your primary creditor. You don't owe the bank anymore. You owe me." Chloe scoffed, slamming her hands on the table. "You think you can scare us? We'll just refuse to pay you." My investigator calmly slid a second folder directly in front of her. Inside were detailed forensic bank records proving that Chloe had been systematically fabricating fake business expenses, forging my parents' signatures on loan documents, and running a massive tax evasion scheme through her shell companies. "Here is your choice," I said, looking straight into Chloe's panicked eyes. "You will sign over the remaining rights of your company to liquidate what's left, and you will vacate my house within 30 days. If you refuse, or if any of you ever attempt to contact me again, these forensic records go straight to the federal authorities for fraud and elder abuse. You signed away my 25th birthday for a lie. Now you're going to sign these papers to save yourselves from prison." With trembling, defeated hands, they picked up the pen and signed. The legal ink dried quickly, and the swift collapse of their house of cards was brutal. Chloe's fraudulent shell company was completely liquidated to settle a fraction of the outstanding debts. Stripped of her unearned wealth, she was forced to face the harsh reality of her actions. She eventually moved into a cramped, depressing studio apartment, working a grueling minimum-wage retail job just to survive. My parents, entirely cut off from my fortune and unable to afford the lifestyle they had foolishly enabled, had no choice but to downsize drastically into a tiny, rundown rental on the edge of town. I never looked back. I legally evicted them from the property I purchased, sold the house to a young, deserving family, and used the profits to further expand my firm's investments. They thought they could cancel my life to satisfy their favorites, but they forgot that an ignored fire eventually burns the whole house down. What would you have done if you held all the cards? Let me know below. If you want to see how far poetic justice can really go, click on one of the 2 videos popping up on your screen right now. Trust me, the twists in those stories will absolutely shock you. Thank you for watching. Until